everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Quantflix TV. I'm Chauwei Yak, CEO of Gal Capital and also Quantflix.com, and we are very proud to launch what we think is the first video blog on hedge funds. I don't think there are a lot of people dying to know about hedge funds. Is not that interesting and fun a subject, which we are going to try to change with this series. So we've been talking about doing this video series for a number of years. Actually, it started with my experience with watching winelibrary.com, and I'm very proud to say that a couple of days ago, Gary V had contacted me via LinkedIn and encouraged me to do this video series. So thank you, Gary V. And so that's why we're doing this today. And we realized that there are a lot of other sources out there where it shows knowledge about hedge funds in a very formal and frankly speaking not very interesting way. I myself have appeared on Bloomberg TV, CNBC, and usually they do it in such a way that it's more professional and maybe uses a lot more technical jargon, which we are going to try to explain in this series. For example, when someone comes on the set and say that they've achieved a really high Sharpe of 3. I know people are like, hey, what's that, right? What does it mean? How should they look at the manager or the strategy? So we are going to take an in-depth look at the hedge fund industry, the different strategies, hedge funds in general. What are the good funds out there, bad funds out there, good strategies out there, bad strategies out there. Generally, keep things kind of fun, right? So I think sending out information that is truly value add would be to present information that would be in a way that is more digestible, and that's what we are going to try to do in Quantflix TV. So we will also be inviting guests from the industry, maybe to talk about their experience. Well, that's the plan at least, right? I don't know whether people are actually going to come on my Quantflix TV, but that's the plan. And we are also going to have them talk about their funds. Maybe we'll do some video tours of their offices. We'll definitely be doing one of our own office, showing kind of the inner workings of what a fund is like, kind of like Kitchen Confidential. And then we'll also have people talk about things that are generally not talked about, right? So when you see on most media sources, right, you have fund managers coming onto the TV shows and talk about how great things are, right? So no one tells you when things don't work out. And so we are going to try to take a sneak peek and kind of peel the onion a little bit. And we're going to try to talk to our staff and talk to people supporting what makes a good hedge funds. There will be departments that people usually overlook. People always focus on the portfolio managers, but then they don't look at who is in the risk department. They don't look at who is in operations, people in compliance. Compliance is always the department that no one wants to talk about, right, in any firm, right? Because those are the people that are policing what's going on. But we'll talk about some of the key trends and maybe how to make life easier for everyone. We're going to have the first topic for our very first episode, which is how to measure the performance of a long-only hedge fund. So long-only hedge funds are not that uncommon, but people always wonder, why do you want to pay extra for a long-only hedge fund, right? But it kind of functions the same way as maybe a mutual fund or maybe even an ETF. So there's a lot of discussion out there whether long-only hedge funds should even be called hedge funds because they are not hedging, but they are a category. So one of our core funds is also a long only or long biased equity fund. And so how do you measure the performance of a fund like that, right? So for example, if our fund is up 40% last year, is that considered a good outcome, right? Or should I just choose to have like a mutual fund, right? So here are some of the steps to do it. Like, so we're just looking at the performance, so just looking at the numbers, like nothing to do with like how good the manager is, what's the stock selection process, nothing like that. Just from the like a very first glance type of exercise. So first we have to look at what benchmark I should measure again, right? Just now I had mentioned things like ETFs or mutual funds. So taking an example of our ASV fund, right? So it's Asia focused fund. So the benchmark that people should be looking at would be MSCI Asia Pacific ex Japan, right? But then if you say like, okay, it's not just in Asia, then you can look at MSCI World to see whether the fund has outperformed its benchmark. But we shouldn't just. It's not always the case that you take that number and you take a look at like how the benchmarks or benchmark indices have performed, right? So the next thing you should look at is what is the gross exposure. So if you're looking at long only, then there would be no shorts. So we don't have to look at the shorts or the net exposure. We'll cover that in another episode. So we'll look at what the gross exposure is. So for example, if a fund comes to you and say that, the gross exposure is 200%, right? And then its returns are, hypothetically like 20%. In that year, and the index was up 10%, right? Then actually it has not outperformed its benchmark, because then you might have to multiply by 2 for the benchmark. So that's how gross exposures work, and that's how you should look at things when you're just looking at performance. If the fund is long only, right? Then the next step would be, okay, what other things should you measure against, right? Just now I had given some clues. You can look at indices, or you could also look at mutual funds in a similar space, right? So if you look at like a Asia Pacific mutual fund out there, then maybe that could be a possible benchmark for you to look at. You should also look at funds that are similar, right? So for example, ASV is a value fund, right? So maybe you should look at other value funds that are long only to see whether it's outperforming or not. Okay, so that's it for today. About how you should look at just the performance of the from a numerical perspective of a long only hedge fund. Okay, so until the next episode. All right, bye.